We're so used to using pottery in our everyday lives that it's easy to forget what a complicated process is involved in producing it. Well, the pottery industry in Britain is really centred in this area, Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. And the potters came here because this is where the raw materials were found, the clay and the coal for the firing. And the sort of earlyware they produced were things like this. This is a slipware. And to my eyes, it's very beautiful. But to the eyes of the ladies and gentlemen of the 18th century, it was all rather crude and nasty. What they wanted was something much more delicate. They wanted a lovely white body, delicate decoration, perhaps a bit of gilding to show how very splendid it was. And you couldn't do that with the sort of clay that was available locally, the sort of dark clay we can see here. So the potters of Staffordshire had to go further afield and scour Britain for new materials. The first stage in turning the dark clay into something that would produce a white clay body came with a most unlikely material, and this is it, flint. They discovered sometime, well, just before the beginning of the 18th century, that if you ground flint into a fine powder and added it to clay, in the firing it made the clay almost white. But of course there was a problem. You had to grind this very hard flint, and that's where the flint mill came in, and that's why we've come here to Cheddleton Flint Mill. The flints had to come from quite a long way away. They came from southern England and from East Anglia, and they had to be brought in by canal. So this is really where the story starts, down by the canal. The flints were unloaded and ready for the first process, and this was calcining. The flints had to be heated so that they were made brittle and easier to crush. So the flints, together with layers of coal, are loaded straight into the kiln. The flints are loaded into what is really the focal point of the whole mill, which is the grinding pan. Here they're crushed by these heavy chert stones on the sweep arms. Chert's a very hard stone that comes from Derbyshire, and the pan itself is paved with an even harder stone, which is a Welsh chert. The slurry runs down first into a wash tub rather similar to this. More water's added, and then these arms rotate, mixing the whole thing up until the slurry is a very uniform consistency, and then it's run off down into the settling arcs. Well, this is the settling arc. The slurry is run down until it fills this whole tank up here, and gradually the powdered flint sinks to the bottom, and the clear water at the top's run off using this plug plank system here. The plugs are slowly removed, and the slurry gets thicker and thicker and thicker until it finishes up as a sort of gooey cake which can be shoveled out for its final drying. The thickened slurry is brought here to the kiln. It's spread out on the stone floor, and hot gases from the furnace pass underneath to produce the final drying effect. The next stage came when English potters attempted to imitate what was then the fashionable style, the porcelain that came in from China. And they found just the right raw material to do that with in Cornwall, and they called it China clay. Well, this is it, China clay. And to produce this material, the whole landscape of the whole corner of Cornwall was completely altered. 45 square miles of country, a great fan spreading out from St. Austell, was turned into a strange, unearthly landscape like this. The lake behind me is the pit from which the clay was removed, and beyond that, the hill is man-made. That's the spoil that was left behind when this clay was removed. This is the Wheal Martin Museum. It's a China clay works begun by the Martin family in the 1820s. Now, the pit is some distance away, and the clay itself's mixed with water as well as some impurities. It has to be pumped right up to the top of the site so that the impurities, mostly mica and sand, can be taken off by running it down by gravity. What the pump's doing is pumping some of this slurry up the hill into settling tanks. This is the bluing house. There's a filter here to take away the debris and the leaves that may come down with the slurry. But its main purpose is to act as a place where the colour of the clay can be kept pure and white. Occasionally it's discoloured by ore in the rocks or other material. So they add dye. There are 2 vats, one blue and one pink. And it's rather like the principle that used to be applied in old-fashioned laundries, where you added blue to keep your laundry nice and white. And exactly the same thing happens here. The man in charge has a very expert eye, and this whole business of balancing the colour has to be very accurately done. But when it's finished, hopefully, the clay is perfect. Well, this is one of the settling tanks. You have to imagine the whole thing full of wet clay. And what they used to do was remove the doorway here when it was dried sufficiently, push out these rails, and gradually shovel this clay into the trucks. Well, the clay is brought here into the dry. It's wheeled onto this bridge, which is a cunning device for getting the rails opposite any of the entrances to any of the tanks. The hot air passes through these flues lined with fire brick. The floor, which is made out of refractory tiles laid on top, and then the clay spread out over that to dry. The hot air was provided by a furnace at this end of the dry and was drawn through to a chimney at the opposite end. Most of the China clay had to be taken round to Staffordshire, and in the 1790s this port of Charlestown was built. The wagons came along up here at the high level, and then the clay itself was tipped down these chutes into the vessels waiting to take it off round the coast and into the Trent. The raw materials were brought here to the yard. There was flint from the flint mills, China clay from Cornwall, other clays from different parts of the country. And they were all left here to weather before they began their long journey through a variety of different processes until they finished up as teacups on the breakfast table. The last of the water is removed in a press like this. It's squeezed out and you finish up with a slab of clay, a lovely pliable material that you can work on, you can mould and shape into whatever object it is you're trying to make. Well, here we are inside the kiln itself. It's coal-fired down at the bottom here, and this whole outer structure is in fact nothing more than a giant chimney. The saggers are brought in here into the central oven, and they're stacked high all the way round. Well, this is the colour sample room, walls full of jars of the most delectable colours. And they're needed because this is the sort of ware that comes out after the first firing. It's called biscuit ware, and as you can see, it's very plain and unadorned. And this colour is going to make it transformed into something magical and marvellous. And to tempt the customer, the potter produced all these samples of all the colours he could produce, different greens, different reds and pinks, different blues. And if you wanted something really fancy, you could always add gold. And there's a special little enamelling kiln outside where the gold was burnt in. And all this, of course, is to sell the ware, to make it desirable, to produce something that the customer's going to want to buy.